Alright, hi, welcome back to our week 5, part 4, which we are going to discuss about one fundamental concept in programming, which is if and else. Alright, so basically, before this, we have learned about two important things. The first one is basic syntax, and the second one is variables and data types, right? Okay, it's very important to understand both things, which is the pillars for programming. But at the same time, I think it's also most important to actually understand the concept of if and else as well, because or normally it's called conditional. I don't have pen with me, but never mind, it's called conditional statement. All right, so basically how if and else work is it will execute if something is true or false depending on the condition or criteria. Now let's go to the very first one. Before we move further to if and else, right, we need to understand one important concept, which is called comparison operators. All right, these comparison operators never mind, these comparison operators. And what is it mean by comparison operators, right? So comparison operators is one mechanism in programming to check either the condition is true or false. What you have to know or be familiar with is all of this symbol. The first one is equal, the second one is not equal, the third one is more than, the fourth one is less than, the fifth one is more than or equal, and then the last one is less than or equal. All right, so let me just try to introduce you with this thing. All right, so what is it mean by equal? In this case, what we can see is origin right now is JFK, right? So it will check is either origin is equal JFK, and the output for the whole thing is always true or false. All right, so now get back to our topic. Now we wanted to check the origin right now is JFK, right? And we wanted to check is this JFK is equivalent to JFK. The answer is true. I think I'll just make it in programming. It's a lot more better. So origin, right? Origin is equivalent to JFK here, right? So the idea is when we compare origin is equivalent to JFK, right? What's going to be happen is we are going to get the output is equivalent true because this origin is technically is JFK, right? But what if I make JFK? Never mind, JFK, which is with the lowercase letter, right? What we are going to get is we are going to get false because if you remember in our slide, our very first slide here, R is actually case sensitive. So even minor changes, which is this one, JFK and JFK capital letter and lowercase letter, right, is going to affect the output of the R. All right, so that is how it works. All right, so this is one example. Now let's go back to JFK. All right, so the answer is true. All right, what if I make not equal? So is origin is JFK is not equal to JFK? The answer is false because JFK is technically is equal to JFK, right? But if I change K capital lowercase letter, then it's going to be true because this one is technically not similar with this one. All right, so that one is on equal and not equal. How about we go to the other things, which is, where is it? Let me just go here, which is more than, let me just go change, more than and less than. All right, so let's try to understand how is it work. All right, so let's go to the next thing, which is more than or less than comparison, right? So let's say we have age is equivalent to 20. All right, so now we wanted to compare, does age more than 40? All right, so is 20 more than 40? The answer is technically false, right? Because 20 is supposedly to be less than 40. So if I run age less than 40, which is age right now is 20, right? What happened is we are going to get true. All right, so that is the concept. That is the concept for what? For the comparison operators. Now the last thing is basically involving this equal signs, which is it will check either it is less than or equal or less than or equal, right? So the way how it work is something like this. So let's say age is 40, right? So if I put age less than or equal to 40, what do you think the output going to be? Right, so the output is going to be true because 40 is technically less than or equal to 40. Same goes to more than or equals to 40. If I run this one, it's going to be true as well. But if I put 39, which is clearly not right, it is not more than or equal to 40, then it's going to get false. Alright, so that is how comparison operator work, which is always return a boolean in the form of true or false. All right, if you can see true, false, true, false, true, false. All right, so this is the basis for if else statement. All right, because if else statement is depending on the value. If the value is true, then it will execute something. If it is false, then it will execute another things. All right, so now how is it work in if else statement? So this is so this is the code syntax for if else statement. All right, so the idea is we wanted to check, or we wanted to detect if 733 is more than 60. If 73 is more than 60, then it's going to print late, or else it's going to print on time. Now I wanted to ask you a question. Does 73 is more than 60? The answer is yes, right? Then because the answer is yes, then it's going to execute this one. All right, so one thing everyone need to know is like this. This is the syntax. All right, so this is the syntax. So if something is true here, right? If it is true here, it's going to execute something from here to here, which is within the curly braces. But if it is false, it's going to execute from here to here. Okay, so let's try to make a simple things first. All right, so I'll just try to give you another example over here before you move further, right? So let's say I put delay is equivalent to 20 and I run this line. Does 20 more than 60? The answer is false, right? So it will skip this one and it will skip this one and it will straight run away to on time. So if I run this line, what happened is we are going to check if 20 is more than 60, the answer is false, right? Then it's going to be written on time. If I put, which is something more than 60, 61, right? If I put 61, does 61 more than 60? The answer is yes. Sorry, give me 1 second. Wait. So 61, right? So if I run this line, does 61 more than 60? The answer is true, right? So it will not run this one because it will straight away go to return late only. All right, so that is how if else work. Now let me just give you one sample. Age is equivalent to 40, right? Print you are young, print you are old. All right, so the idea is I wanted to make age less than 40. All right, so if age is less than 40, which is this one is not right, it's going to print this one. If I run this one, right, what's going to be happen is you are old. The reason is because it goes to this bracket. All right, and it's not execute this bracket. But what if I change age to 30, which is correct, right? 30 is less than 40. It is true. It will run this one, which is you are young, and it will skip this one, which is you are old. So that is how if else work in generals, right? So it's quite simple, it's quite straightforward. For if else, you just have to understand the syntax, number one, and number two is you have to understand how is it work with the comparison operators. Now let's say when we use if else, right, we only have two conditional only. It is either true, one things, or false, right? It is very binary, right? It is 1 or 0. But what if you have two conditions, right? Something like this. If you have two conditions where if delay more than 120 is going to be very late, but then if delay more than 60 is going to be late, and or else it's going to be on time. So the way how this one work, I'll just like print this one in here. I'll just like copy paste this one in here. So the way how this one work is, let's say if I define delay here to be 120, right? It's going to be print this, which one? Which one do you think is going to print? So it's going to print late, right? The reason is because 120 is not more than 120, right? I mean 120 here, which is delay is 120, right? It's not more than 120. It is the second one, which is more than 60, but it is not more than 120. So it will execute the second one. But if I put equal here, I wanted to ask you, does 120 is more than or equal than 120? The answer is yes. Then it will output the very late. So that is how it works for if else. So the very first thing that you need to know about if else is basically the comparison operator. That is one. Number two is you need to know about how is the concept and how is the syntax, which is the syntax is quite straightforward. You just simply put here condition here. This one is condition, and then you put curly braces, and you make else, and then curly braces. All right, so that is how is it work. If you notice, we have curly braces over here, and else we have curly braces over here. All right, so that is how it works. And then we have if else, which is similar as well, which is the syntax is something like this. If condition one, and then we put square brackets, right? And it's curly braces, and then we put else if condition 2, we put curly braces again, and last one is else curly braces. So that is how it works. If you notice, this one is curly braces, else if condition, and then we have curly braces, and else we have curly braces as well. So I think that's it for if else. It's not that difficult. It's actually quite straightforward. See you guys in the next video. Bye bye.